America's rise to superpower status is often explained through leadership, values, or military brilliance. But the deeper historical and economic reality is far more structural. By the end of World War II, nearly every major industrial power outside the United States was physically and financially devastated. Europe and large parts of Asia had lost factories, railways, ports, housing, and millions of skilled workers. Even victorious nations like Britain and the Soviet Union were economically exhausted, buried under debt, inflation, and reconstruction costs. Industrial capacity, the true foundation of modern power, had been shattered almost everywhere. The United States emerged from the war in the opposite condition. Its mainland was untouched, its workforce intact, and its industrial base vastly expanded. During the war, American factories had transformed into a global production engine, supplying weapons, vehicles, food, and raw materials not just for itself, but for much of the Allied world. By 1945, the U.S. produced roughly half of global industrial output, controlled the majority of the world's gold reserves, and possessed the only economy capable of mass production at scale. This was not merely a military advantage, it was an economic monopoly. When peace arrived, global demand surged. Countries needed machinery, consumer goods, capital, and food to rebuild. And the United States was the only supplier capable of meeting that demand quickly and reliably. As Europe and Asia rebuilt, they imported American goods and relied on American financing, creating a powerful feedback loop that reinforced U.S. dominance. America did not rise by defeating equal competitors. It rose because the competitive field had collapsed. In that moment of history, superpower status belonged not to the strongest visionary, but to the only industrial giant left standing. America's industrial capacity did more than survive World War II. It fundamentally reshaped the global balance of power. While other nations struggled to repair bombed factories and broken supply chains, the United States had already mastered mass production on an unprecedented scale. Techniques pioneered before the war, such as standardization, assembly line efficiency, and scientific management, were supercharged by wartime necessity. The result was an economy capable of producing planes, ships, vehicles, steel, and food faster and cheaper than any rival in history. This scale created a decisive economic advantage. Industrial output is not just about quantity. It determines speed, resilience, and adaptability. The United States could retool factories quickly, redirect labor efficiently, and absorb shocks without collapsing. During the war, this meant overwhelming logistical superiority. After the war, it meant dominating civilian markets. American companies flooded global markets with machinery, automobiles, appliances, and industrial inputs, embedding U.S. production standards into the world economy. Competitors were not just behind, they were locked into America's supply chains. Economically, industrial scale translated directly into power. High productivity supported rising wages, expanding consumption, and rapid technological innovation at home, while exports generated foreign dependence abroad. The United States didn't just sell goods, it sold the infrastructure of modern life. By the time other nations began to recover, American industry had already shaped the rules of global production. Superpower status, in this sense, was not claimed through ideology or force alone, but manufactured, piece by piece, on factory floors that no other nation could match. America's industrial dominance alone did not make it a superpower. Financial control completed the transformation. By the end of World War II, the global monetary system was in ruins. European currencies were unstable, trade was fragmented, and gold reserves were concentrated overwhelmingly in the United States. In this vacuum, the U.S. dollar emerged as the only credible foundation for rebuilding international finance. The 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement formalized this reality by tying global currencies to the dollar, and the dollar itself to gold. This arrangement gave the United States an extraordinary economic advantage. Because global trade was settled in dollars, foreign governments and central banks needed to hold U.S. currency and U.S. assets. This created constant external demand for dollars, allowing the United States to run trade deficits without facing the same constraints as other nations. American banks expanded internationally. U.S. Treasury bonds became the world's safest asset, and Washington gained enormous influence over global liquidity and capital flows. The deeper power of the dollar system was structural, not political. By controlling the world's reserve currency, the United States effectively sat at the center of the global economy. Financial crises, trade expansions, and post-war reconstruction all flowed through American institutions. Even as other nations rebuilt their industries, they remained tied to a dollar-based system that privileged U.S. stability in policy choices. Military strength mattered, but it was the dollar that quietly turned economic influence into lasting superpower status. After World War II, the United States didn't just dominate industry and finance. It leveraged its position to shape the global order. Europe and Asia were devastated, and their economies were fragile. The U.S. stepped in with initiatives like the Marshall Plan, providing massive financial aid to rebuild infrastructure, stabilize currencies, and restart trade. This wasn't pure altruism. It was a strategic investment. By exporting stability, America created markets for its goods, ensured political allies, and embedded its economic influence in the post-war world. Economically, this approach generated enormous returns. Countries receiving aid rebuilt using American machinery, steel, and technology, creating dependence on U.S. production and standards. U.S. companies expanded globally, accessing new markets and securing long-term contracts. Military spending also played a role, funding research and innovation that spilled over into civilian industries. In essence, America turned global recovery into a self-reinforcing cycle. The more it helped rebuild, the more it profited, and the more influence it gained. This strategy combined soft power and hard power in a way no other nation could match. America didn't just defeat enemies in battle, it won hearts, economies, and political loyalty. By exporting stability, it institutionalized its dominance and made the post-war world dependent on American systems of finance, production, and governance. The result was a superpower whose strength came not only from military might or industrial scale, but from a global economic network built to benefit the United States first and foremost. While wars, industry, and finance played critical roles, the ultimate reason America became a superpower lies in its institutions and economic systems. Unlike other nations that relied heavily on charismatic leaders or centralized power, the United States built resilient political and economic structures that supported innovation, growth, and adaptability over decades. Stable legal frameworks, property rights, and open markets created incentives for entrepreneurship and investment, allowing businesses to scale and industries to thrive. Immigration also fueled this system. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the U.S. absorbed talent from around the world, providing a skilled and diverse workforce that could drive technological advancement and economic expansion. Capital markets developed to efficiently allocate resources, financing both private enterprise and public infrastructure. These systems were self-reinforcing. Innovation and investment created wealth, which strengthened institutions, which in turn promoted more innovation. This structural advantage was far more sustainable than any individual leader or policy. Economically, these systems gave the United States unmatched flexibility. Even as global crises emerged, such as wars, depressions, or foreign competition, the U.S. could adapt while maintaining growth. It wasn't military genius or historical accident alone that created superpower status. It was a combination of economic, legal, and institutional frameworks that multiplied every other advantage: geography, industrial scale, financial dominance, and global influence. In other words, the real reason America became a superpower was not what it did in a single decade, but how its systems amplified opportunity over generations. By the mid-20th century, all the factors behind America's rise, industrial scale, financial dominance, geography, and institutional strength, combined into a self-reinforcing momentum that cemented superpower status. The United States was not only producing more goods than the rest of the world combined, but it also controlled the financial systems that funded reconstruction, trade, and investment globally. This convergence of production capacity and monetary influence created a cycle where economic power generated political and strategic leverage, and vice versa. Global reconstruction reinforced America's position. Nations rebuilding after World War II relied heavily on American machinery, technology, and financial support, embedding U.S. economic models and standards worldwide. Exports fueled domestic growth, while U.S. corporations expanded into international markets, securing long-term advantages that competitors struggled to match. At the same time, the dollar-based financial system ensured that international trade, debt, and investment flowed through American institutions, giving the United States extraordinary influence over the global economy. This industrial and financial momentum became difficult to challenge. Other nations could rebuild their industries or reform their economies, but none could replicate the combination of intact infrastructure, abundant resources, global demand, and institutional stability that the United States had. By aligning production, finance, and strategy in one coherent system, America turned its wartime advantages into lasting global dominance. Superpower status was no longer a result of circumstance alone. It was embedded in the structure of the American economy and its position in the global system. America became a superpower not because of luck or leaders, but because of industry, finance, geography, and strong institutions all working together. Intact factories, abundant resources, the global reach of the dollar, and post-war rebuilding created lasting economic and political power. If you found this breakdown insightful, like and subscribe for more history and finance explained.